I'm going to read this and edit and we get hi everyone. As Kathleen said, my name is Erin Dixon and I am going to talk to you about my thesis research, which I did thoroughly enjoy doing. Okay, I didn't want to work. Okay. I want to give you a little background into why I picked this subject. And part of it was every day I'm seeing news about how climate change is occurring faster than we thought. And yet we're still not doing enough to kind of make an impact on it as big as we want. I also found a Yale survey saying that while most Americans believe in climate change, fewer Americans actually think it's impacting them. And so I just feel there's a disconnection from nature, a disconnect from really understanding what's happening around us. And I was very curious, like how we could change this. How can we create communities that care about environmental issues? How can we, as Americans who are mostly not indigenous to this place, how can we form connections to nature that aren't culturally appropriative and that are very deep and reciprocal? And around the same time I was having these thoughts, I learned of a friend who was starting a group for women to learn about their Northwestern European ancestral earth-based traditions. And I'm someone who fits that description. And by Northwestern Europe, I mean British Isles, Denmark, Scandinavia, those places. And that's where most of my ancestors come from. And so that led me to come up with this research question. How does connecting to with ancestral earth-based traditions affect non-Indigenous Americans' connection with nature? Is it a pathway for us to form those deep reciprocal relationships with nature that Indigenous people have, the people who've lived here for thousands and thousands of years? They have those relationships and that connection. And I wanted a way that I could have that too. And Robin Wall Kimmerer, if you've read Braiding Sweetgrass, which probably a lot of you have, she talks about how indigeneity is a birthright. And I don't have that birthright as a European ancestor person. But she did say that we could become naturalized to place. That although we're not from here, we can still love the earth and love land here. So I started going to these gatherings. There were 8. They focused on the Wheel of the Year, which is based on ancestral traditions in Northwest Europe. And so I spent a year going to these events. They're about 6 to 8 weeks apart. At these events, we would learn about our ancestral myths and stories. We would sing, we would do activities that were based in the seasons that we were in. And we would spend a lot of time talking about how what our ancestors would have been doing at this time and how they would have been experiencing the seasons. And so it was really tied to the cycles of nature. And we spent most time outside, although when it was colder, we did do more indoors and spend less outside because it's very cold in Utah. Because these did all take place in Utah. That's where my friend is from. So these all took place in Salt Lake City area, in the valley around that area. So for my methods, after going to these events and being a part of this community, I was able to get 8 women to volunteer to do interviews with me about their experience and how studying their ancestral practices has impacted their relationship with nature. And so I did the interviews, I got the transcripts, and I coded them. And after that analysis, I found a few major themes overall. And I will now discuss those different themes that I found. So first and foremost, I was interested in the types of nature connection that were being formed through learning about these ancestral practices. And I grouped them into interconnections and outer connections, and you'll understand why more in the next screen or next slide. But interconnections have to do with internal connections, like how we're feeling, our philosophical worldview, what we know about nature. And then outer or external connections are about like our experiences, like we're taking a hike in nature, or we are feeling the wind on our skin, or we are, admiring the beauty. And one particular type of connection I wanted to point out was animism, a type of philosophical or worldview connection. Every single person mentioned some form of this in their interview, so I found that very interesting. They either mentioned talking to plants and animals now, whereas maybe they hadn't before, or they felt that animals, plants, non-human beings had spirits and souls and were kin and parts of their community. So I was interested in learning if these types of connections are deep enough to create maybe systems, change in systems and change in society. And so that's why I grouped them into outer and inner, because according to leverage points theory, if you don't know anything about that, there are certain actions we can take that will create a greater change in society versus other actions we could take. So as far as environmental concerns go, there are two groups of researchers who looked at different types of nature connection and how they fit into this system. And so outer connections were found to be less likely to change a system, whereas the inner connections were deep leverage points and they were more likely to create greater change. And so I wanted to use all the types of nature connection I could. So I kind of combined these two together. If I can go to the next slide, hold on. Into this kind of system right here. So just combine the two, and I looked at all of these different types of nature connection when I was going through my interviews and coded for these, among other things. And what I found is that, yes, there were both inner and outer connections happening. And the interconnections were actually talked about more. I don't know that that necessarily means they were forming more interconnections, just something they wanted to talk to me about more. But what I found interesting is just that they were there. And that is what, according to leverage points theory, those are the types of connections that can lead to, or have a greater potential to lead to systemic change. So I saw some of this evidence of that potential in the interviews themselves in two main ways. One is one of the other themes, the second theme that was on that slide, is that they wanted to share what they had learned. They all were either actively doing these activities with their family, like learning about these ancestral practices, or they really wanted to. Like some of the people who are newer to it, they were trying to find ways to bring that into their families and teach it to their kids. And so it's not just them learning about it, they're like passing it on to the next generation. They're passing it also to like nieces and nephews and brothers and sisters. And so it's, you know, spreading, which is important for a system change. And then the second thing was that they were participating in more pro-environmental behaviors. Some hadn't been doing as much before they started to learn about their ancestral practices. And some didn't really know what to do, but by coming to these events, they learned from other women, which gets into my next theme that I wanted to talk about, which was community. And all of them mentioned the importance of community in this whole process. And it was important for learning about ancestral knowledge from those who knew more, for those who knew less, but also, like I said, taking environmental actions. They, groups of these women went together to do protests about the Great Salt Lake. I would look at their pictures online, wishing I could be there, and they were dressed up like birds and brine shrimp and other creatures that relied on the Great Salt Lake for life. They also took part in letter writing campaigns for their legislators. So they really are trying to change the laws and in their area to protect their environment. And they also mentioned not feeling alone. So like seeing other people doing things inspires them and also helps them to feel like they really can make a difference. If you're doing things with other people, you think, oh, I'm not the only one doing this. Maybe this really can change things. And the last major theme was religion as a hindrance to connection. So something about these women and myself is they were all former members of the Mormon Church, so they grew up with those teachings. And so I'm not saying that every religion has teachings that are hindrance to connection, but that is something that can be contained. And with, we do have a very religious country. I think that's an interesting finding. And how could we change that? Because as someone who does know these teachings, like there are seeds there of like being stewards of the earth and taking care of God's creation. So how, I think, research into how we could make that shift in churches and what a big difference that would make if churches were encouraging their people to go be environmental stewards. I think that's an interesting area to look into. I don't know how to make that change, but it would be cool. Next steps, kind of what I was talking about before, more research. There hasn't been a lot of research done on this. So research over time, I would love to go back in a few years and see how sharing with their families is affecting their kids and their connection to nature. I would love to see this done in other groups, other populations of people, because this was a very specific population. So how does this work in other populations? How do we form connections on a community level? There's a lot of study about how individuals form connections, but how can we, how do communities impact that? And also spiritual connections with nature, that was mentioned a lot, but there's not a lot of study about that either. And also just how can governments and communities support this kind of learning and the practice of these festivals and things like that. So overall, I found that although this is a very specific population, I don't think it's universally applicable. My results, I do find a lot of promise in them. And I do feel like tapping into our own ancestral connections is a pathway to deep connection with nature, and also a pathway to feel like naturalized to this place, like Robin Wall Kimmerer talked about. And something I have to constantly remember is that I am a part of nature. So a lot of this is talking about connecting with nature outside of ourselves, but we are really a part of it too. And so it's not just about connecting to the non-human beings around us, but connecting to each other. And just, especially with recent events and all the war and destruction and loss of life, I feel like it's so important to find ways to create communities that truly care about all the beings in them. And I just wanted to leave you with one quote from my research, although I wish I could have said so many more. But I feel like it expresses exactly my hope for what can happen if we can tap in to either our ancestral connections as a way to connect, or just finding any way you can to connect. The whole experience with Nourishing Kin and this whole experience with Great Salt Lake advocacy really has shown me that communities are also land-based and place-specific, because land brings people together, not just because of proximity, but when we really turn toward and care for the land, we can't help but also turn toward and care for each other. And that's my hope for all of us, that one day we can all live in communities that truly care for each other. And I hope that all of you will leave here today curious about your ancestral practices if you don't know much about them, and also with a thought in your head about how you can show up in your communities and form communities that care about each other. And so with that, I just wanted to give a few thanks. First and foremost, to all the wonderful women who allowed me to interview them. I'm so grateful for their time and their knowledge they shared with me. I'm grateful for Kathleen, who has been a support and an encouragement that I could actually get this done. And Sean Hasbun, even though she's not here anymore, she was a great mentor to me while she was here. And I want to thank my friends, Erica Benoit and Elizabeth Torres and Kaylee Kuffner for all their support and helping me get through grad school. They're all MES alums. And my family, my partner, my kids, for giving me the space to do my work and for being there when I needed a break. So with that, are there any questions?